Hi, good afternoon. This is Marsha Enright from The Great Connections, and we're going to have a conversation with Lucy Hare, who is a chemical engineer and also the mother of one of the very first students we had at The Great Connections in 2009, who is now, he was a high school student at the time, and he came back several times to our programs, and he's now a materials engineer in California. So Lucy, I heard that you had a very interesting entree into becoming a chemical engineer. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, I actually use it to try to help people understand what they might want to do with their lives and why when I'm talking sometimes publicly. So I had it in mind from the time I was pretty young that I wanted to be a professional musician, a performing artist actually, to write and sing and play my own piano and music. So when I was in the 9th grade, I had this weird experience where a science teacher made all of us do this big project where we had to research what we wanted to do. We had to do biographies of somebody living and somebody dead. We had to write off to the Bureau of Labor Statistics for how many people did it and how much money they made, and all of this information that we had to write.
Fantastic.
It was a kind of project I think everybody should have to do.
Yes, absolutely.
No, it was very eye-opening for me because I looked at it and I said, oh my gosh, if I become a musician, if that's what I decide to do, I'm either going to have to teach if I want to have a reliable living, because the chances of becoming one of the really big stars is pretty small, or I'll have to work nights and weekends, and I probably won't make that much, and it'll be very hard to have a stable family life. So here's what happened. It so happened that my dad was a chemical engineer. And I went to him and I said, Dad, I don't know if I want to be a chemical engineer, but I really, I'm a little worried about this profession I've chosen. What about chemistry? Would I like chemistry? And in just a few sentences, he revealed to me a few things about myself I didn't know. He said, well, you could be a chemist if you want to, but if you want to do that and you get a bachelor's, you're going to be working for other people. And he said, if you get a chemical engineer with a bachelor's, the chemists will be working for you if they don't have their PhD.
Oh.
And I went, oh. I said, well, I guess I better be a chemical engineer. Because I knew, my dad knew me well enough to know at that age that I had a tendency to want to make my own destiny, and make decisions about what I was going to do, not be told what to do. So anyway, I set things up thinking, well, maybe I'll still do music, but I'll go ahead and I'll do my high school classes and I'm going to be a chemical engineer, and then I'll go on and become one. And it's a long story for how I ended up, but I actually have my PhD in chemical engineering. And that's another story, which probably isn't suitable for this time period.
It's such an interesting story, and your dad sounds like a really wise man.
In many ways, he was.
Yeah, that's great.
Where it came to career advice, he was great.
Great. So how did you decide to send Eric to The Great Connections the first year, especially when it was an untried experience?
Okay, well, that's a great question. And interestingly, it wasn't something that we had to think about very hard. We thought about things and told him to explore and find out what he thought about things on his own. But we felt that it would be a useful thing. Plus, we had learned through his early education that he did not think the way most other students did in school. He had, most kids are, I think, I'm not absolutely sure of this, but my observation was that most kids were fairly happy to get the assignments they were given, to progress through them and get to the end and turn it in, and they were done with it. Whereas Eric, from an early age, would take the assignment that was given to him. In the 2nd grade, for example, they were supposed to cut out a pumpkin and cut out eyes and paste it on them. Well, I happened to be in the class with him during that project. And instead of working on the project, he's looking at it and he's going, look at how many different shapes I can make by following these angles. And he was talking about that. I said, this is amazing. Look at this. If I cut it this way, I get this. If I cut it this way, I get that. Yes, but you have this project to finish. So I I had understood from that little experiment and from other things teachers had said to me that he didn't think the same way. Mm. You know, that his way of approaching things was not particularly dependent on what other people thought of him, even though he really loved other people. It was more what excited him at the moment. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, maybe this will be a good thing for him to see difficult material and think about it deeply and be introduced to another way of thinking. So both Laura and I agreed this would be good. And in exchange, he didn't know that he wanted to do this. So he said, look, we know you're uncertain, but if you go, we'll make sure you get to go and spend the following week with your cousins down in Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that was the arrangement.
It was a good deal.
Go to Riffy, and then you can go visit your cousins. Yeah. So that's how that happened.
Yeah, I see. And I just wanted to let the audience know what you were talking about in terms of challenging material. So in our week-long program, which is the one that Eric went to, we have students read very difficult texts from what's called the classics in subjects anywhere from philosophy to physics, poetry, history, economics. It can be Aristotle, it can be Kant, it can be Newton, it can be de Tocqueville, and we discuss these in a collaborative seminar. And most of the students, especially the younger ones, mostly have not done any kind of work like this before. But even older students, I mean, I've had students up to the age of 30 in the class with us, and he had done readings like this, but never in a collaborative discussion. So it's quite challenging, but it's exciting too, because in our collaborative discussions, the students get to talk about what things in the piece are interesting to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good way to describe it.
Yeah.
Go ahead with whatever.
Oh, and I just wanted to add, we also do other things. We don't just sit in the classroom and read and discuss texts. We also go out and see art and talk about art, and we learn about the city and how it got built, and we try to connect up all the ideas in the classroom with the real world to make them so much more powerful for the students.
Yes, yes, and that's one of the things that appealed to me also, is that there was a section that I think you still have it, but you certainly had it when Eric took the classes, where the students who are there talk about kind of what they want to be when they grow up, and they get help in thinking about that.
Yes, I give them individual consultations. If they want to talk to me about anything that's on their mind, but oftentimes about what they want to do with themselves, they get an individual consultation.
Yeah, that's really valuable, especially after a week where you've been exposed to art and architecture and fairly deep literature, sometimes scientists. I know you bring them in, sometimes economists, sometimes fiction writers, so there's a wide range of people they may be exposed to. So it was a long week, and I know that for the first one, I know that it was a lot more intense, other than the drama work that Eric had done, training, than he'd been involved in before. And yet that was not the impression that I got from him. I didn't get the impression, oh my God, they're making us work so hard, this is horrible. It was more like, we're spending all this time on it and it's amazing. that was the reaction that I was getting from it. And I wanted to make sure I had been thinking about this when I knew I was going to talk to you, and how I would describe Eric's, one of the most profound things for me to see in Eric after he came back from this experience. Eric is probably one of the most naturally exuberant and optimistic people you're likely to meet in your life. Yeah. That's the way people tend to describe him. I think that the experience he had that week helped him to understand intellectually and justify his optimism and his outlook on life.
That's wonderful to know, especially because there are so many forces these days to make people feel depressed.
Mhm.
Whether you know, the idea that there are no heroes, that everything's going to hell in a handbasket. I mean,
Right.
it's just all around us in the
Yep.
ideas, in the art, and what you're taught at school. I mean, I remember reading an article not that long ago about how much of young adult literature is about kids whose families are drunks, they're abusive, they cut it themselves, and that's what the young kids are reading now instead of Treasure Island, you know, where the kid is a hero.
Well, I think there is everywhere I see in culture right now a tendency to say, well, we want to allow kids to see people who look like them.
Yeah.
And I go, that has its value, but it's also valuable to see people who aspire to something and who actually either get to just see the struggle of trying to be that thing, or you get to see the actuality of becoming that thing. And I think that for many of us as children, particularly as a 17-year-old, I remember wanting to do something wonderful with my life.
Yes.
When I was 17, it was a particularly emotional time for me.
Yeah.
I think just by virtue of being 17, you know, not
common. I think that's a very common feeling when you're that age.
Right. You want to go out and slay a dragon. You know, you want to change the world in some way or another. And if you can't be a hero, if you're not given the possibility that you could be a hero or a heroine or whatever word you want to use for it, what are you going to be? So I really think that's probably why superhero movies are so good. But I also think it's important for literature to introduce that more to them. We're recording.
I'm off. I'll be back.
Okay.
So you thought that was good, that he came home feeling very validated and with a good grounding, and why that attitude towards life was a good attitude.
Yeah. I'm not sure that at that time he would have recognized that was the feeling he was having. But I feel that if I were to tell him that now, that he would agree. Now, I talked to him just recently about this and asked him, you know, what, with respect to education, what was the most significant thing? And one of the things that he said to me that I thought was very important is that it made him realize that he could understand extremely difficult stuff. Things that before he would have looked at and went, oh, that's opaque, I have no idea what it means, and left it alone. After that experience, he thought, this is difficult, but if I choose to, I can sit here and take it apart and I can understand it.
That's great, because that's one of the purposes of the program, is so that the kids that come can learn how to understand things themselves independently. They don't need an authority.
Yeah.
Good.
And I would say it was life-changing for Eric. We thought it might do him some good. We didn't realize he would become a convert and regarded as one of the most significant things that happened educationally in his life.
Wow. That's wonderful to know. I'm glad. Yeah. I know it was interesting. You know, one of the things that I do when I put these curricula together is that I try to pick things that have a thematic relationship to each other, even though they might be something philosophy, they might be physics. And but I don't tell them that. And I let them try to discover it. And Eric cottoned onto that after about the second time. He was saying things like, okay, so how is this related to that? And what's the connection? You know, as part of the great connection. Yeah. But it's a way of teaching how to look for connections in life. And because all your knowledge is related to each other, you know, each part of your knowledge is related to each other, but we're so often taught it in separate baskets. You know, science is not related to history or literature, but it's actually very important the way that it's related to those things.
It absolutely it is.
You know.
So I'm worried about digressing too much, but did you ever, there's a wonderful book, which if you ever get a chance, you should read it. It's called The Measure of Reality. And it is about time measurement and distance measurement and how that affected how things occurred. And one of the most fascinating things in my mind that happened was when algebra, which is not algebra as we think about it now, but the system of numbers, the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, as opposed to the Roman numerals. Mm-hmm. Before that was invented, there was no good way to navigate. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there was also no good way to do sums. Mm. So after that was introduced into, roughly the Middle Ages era, everything after that changed. Mm. As far as people being able to find their way from point A to point B and to do sales properly. Mm-hmm. So it's like, so that's a piece of history, but it's also a piece of math. Yes. Well, there's a great argument made that math and science should be taught in its historical context, mm-hmm. so that you see why the discovery is so important to human life. Yes. Yeah. And not all of it's immediately obvious. This is one that if you had told me that they introduced 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, they didn't introduce 0 at that time, but the 1 through 10, if you had told me that it was going to lead to that, I would have been amazed. Right. But exactly. But yeah, once you see it laid out, you go, okay, I see the reasons for it. Yes. So right. Very cool. So you've told us somewhat about his change in thinking and some of the effects. Anything else that you wanted to share? About the effect of Riffy with respect to Eric? Yeah. Or okay. Any observations you made, I'm opening it up for whatever you'd like to say. Well, as I know because you just mentioned it, Eric actually went for 3 full sessions and a partial one. Mm-hmm. The last full one that he went to, he made the arrangements with you directly. Mm-hmm. I didn't make them, which says something about how fully he had embraced this way of approaching knowledge, not only as something that he would incorporate in his life, but something that he enjoyed enough to make an event out of it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. Oh, and even with respect to the first one, let's get back to the first one. Sorry about this. You had made arrangements for the class to go to a restaurant. Mm-hmm. And they got served like 12 courses or something. I can't remember how many there were. Trotter. Yes, it was Charlie Trotter's restaurant. I think he's since passed away, but at that time, I believe he was himself there. Mm-hmm. And he explained to the students how he thought about the cooking and the excellence that was involved in it. Mm-hmm. How that's what he strove for all the time. Yes. Within his restaurant. I thought that was significant. Mm. I mean, you should have heard Eric describe the food. You'll have to ask him to do that sometime. He's a real foodie, so. He is, but that was kind of the beginning of him being, he'd always enjoyed cooking. Yeah. Always enjoyed cooking. But I believe this took food to a new level he did not know existed. Mm. And it was not just, this is not just about the food, this is also about the excellence aspect of it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it was in the following year, I don't know if you're aware of this, so this is between his junior and his senior year that he took your Riffy class. Mm. The following year, he had the lead in the high school's production of 1984. Oh, wow. So he played Winston. Oh, wow. And this, because of his previous experience at the Riffy Institute, he thought about the whole thing differently. Mm. He thought about the text differently. He thought about the ramifications differently. He even I think he spent more time working out how to play that part than I had ever seen him. He was heavily into drama, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I had not, he'd always made sure he did a good job with his parts, but this one was even more, I think, mm-hmm. than the others I'd seen because of what it meant because of what he'd experienced the previous summer. And again, because he's 17, and 17 is sort of a big deal.
Yes. Well, that's really interesting. Did you have any observations on contemporary schooling or any effects that you've seen, for example, in people that you hire or students that you work with in your job?
So I may not, looking for contemporary schooling, I may not be the right person to ask about any negatives as far as that goes.
Or anything?
Most of the,
Yeah.
so most of the students that I've worked with at in my capacity at one of the national laboratories have been from the United States Military Academy at West Point.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
And
one of the
and they are specifically from the chemical engineering department, which is very small and very selective at the academy. So these are self-selected and then later on selected by Congress people, and then they have to go through an insanely rigorous schooling, which makes, I thought my schooling was rigorous, which makes what I did look like a piece of cake. So for those students, I would say that that set of students who are taught history, military history, politics, leadership, math, science, engineering, they have a pretty good sense of their place in the world and how the world works. I do not know, and all the other students I've worked with typically are kind of at the top of their game from whatever school they go to. So, I've never worked, well, only once or twice have I worked with those who are more liberal arts. But even there, I have to say that the ones who, for example, are international relations scholars, the ones that we bring in, they're great.
So you've had a wonderful experience.
Yeah, that's been a great experience.
That's great. I'm glad to know that top people are working at the labs.
Yeah, that's what you want to hear.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. There's an organization called the American Council for Trustees and Alumni, and their aim is to examine what's going on in the universities to see whether students are getting the kind of education they should. So they have projects in which they look at the curricula at different schools to see whether students are getting an adequate amount of history, of math, of science, all the subjects that are really important to know about. And then they rate the schools. And the West Point almost always comes out on top.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And
that makes sense to me.
Yeah, sounds like it. The other interesting point one of the interesting points I've heard from them is that in most places, freshmen know more about American history than seniors at the college.
Oh, that's weird. You mean they lose information by the time they get to be seniors?
Yep.
Well,
they're not learning anything about it either.
That does not surprise me. I mean, I didn't, as an undergraduate, I didn't have any history. But that was because my curriculum was, I had 12 hours of liberal arts I could take, and I had 12 hours of technical electives that I could take, and everything else was engineering and science. That was it. Yeah. So there was no room for history. I happen to know some history because I'm interested in it, but it wasn't part of my education. And I have been wondering, you asked the question what I thought about current education. I have been wondering what the status is, because I hear all these rumors. When my children were in high school and elementary school in general, they revisited the history of the United States frequently. And as nearly as I can tell, it was fairly evenly taught. It was pretty factual. It was pretty interesting. I don't know what it's like now. That's been 10, 15 years ago. I hear rumors, but I don't know if they're true.
They're true.
Oh, well, that's dismaying.
Yes.
I'm very sorry to hear that.
Yeah, they've gutted a lot of the curriculum and put in ideas that are fit the contemporary politicized ideology that's being pushed. So it's very unfortunate. It's one of the reasons it actually got started a long time ago and started more at the universities and then trickled down to elementary schools as the students got educated who became the teachers. And so ACTA started about 30 years ago because of this. And they keep track of all this. I'll put it in the program notes if anybody's interested in finding out more about that organization. I think every parent who's considering sending their child to college should go there. They have a wonderful guide for helping you look at what these different colleges offer, and quite valuable, I think.
I'm sorry to hear the rumors are true. I don't know any elementary school kids right now, so I couldn't ask them lots of questions to see whether or not it was so. I do know, we mentioned before this, that there's an effort to put the 1619 project into the schools. Have you seen that in action yet?
Many public schools are adopting it.
Ugh. Okay.
And the problem is that if it were only about ensuring that parts of about the history of the United States are included in the teaching, which formerly maybe weren't included enough. For example, more of the history of slavery before founding. I mean, that's absolutely something people should know about. But unfortunately, the project is shot through with politically partisan ideas.
Right.
And so, and terrific historical inaccuracies. There's been many historians who just say it's wrong in a lot of respects. And now they're going to teach it to kids everywhere. So
that's a lot of what worries me too.
Parents should know what their kids are getting in school. So.
Yes, they should.
Anyway.
Absolutely.
Well, before we wrap it up, because I don't want to keep you too long, is there anything else you wanted to say, and any other thoughts you wanted to share?
I wish there were more RIFI institutes, and you were able, there were more of you able to do it, because I think that this sort of thinking is, and this outlook, not just the ability to think like this, but the outlook towards life, the outlook towards how you can interpret your life so that it's a good one, is terribly important, but particularly the thinking. And I don't think we're getting enough of it. I'm not sure there's enough of it even to be more than a small trickle of the ambassadors that are necessary for this. So that, I think, I consider this to have been so valuable that I want to see a lot more of it. I just don't know how to go about achieving that. I'm sure you're thinking about it.
I'm still working on it, yes. I'm still working on expanding, so, but thank you for saying that. I'm so glad to hear that you think it's that valuable.
I do, and I think it's been that valuable for Eric.
Thank you. I appreciate all your support over the years too.
Yes, you are more than welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time and your ideas. We're going to put some different information in the program notes. So if you think of anything you'd like to share, please email it to me.
Okay.
And, good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Marsha.
All right.